Welcome to another episode of Conversations at Foothills. My guest today is Dr. Roxolana Zigon. Why has Russia not been able to claim victory 3 years after the war started?
The question mark is that what kind of result is expected from the Russian side and from the side of the West?
How do you think Russia is going to look at it if Pakistan take the military route to solve this problem of terrorism from Afghanistan?
In order to negotiate the interest between Russia and the United States in the South Asia. That's why what is going on in Afghanistan is warmed up and backed up by the United States.
Do you think there will be another conflict between India and Pakistan?
If it will be within the scope of interest of Washington, believe me, they will initiate it.
Welcome to another episode of Conversations at Foothills. My name is Fahd Husain. Today we have a very special guest who's visiting Pakistan. We are going to talk about a number of issues which center around Russia's policy globally in Europe, and of course, specifically in the region and with Pakistan. My guest today is Dr. Roxolana Zigon. She's the Director, Center of Strategic and International Research in Moscow. She's also a strategic advisor and expert in diplomacy and international relations. Dr. Zigon, welcome. So now we need to talk about a lot of issues, but I want to start with the big issue of Russia and Ukraine. And a question which a lot of people in Pakistan have been asking is that after it's been more than 3 years of the war, I believe it started somewhere in March of 2022. Why has Russia not been able to claim victory 3 years after the war started?
I'm surprised a bit that you have started such an important conversation from a Russian-Ukrainian frame, but I understand your concern. I think it's not your concern, it's the concern of many of our partners and those who are actually wondering when this kind of conflict ends and how the things will be proceeding. But first of all, I would like to say that Russia is fulfilling a special military operation. And it's not for nothing that this kind of activity is called this way. So we're not proclaiming it as a war, because we fully understand, we're fully aware that the mission of Russia, the military mission of Russia in Ukraine, has a significantly important role from the point of historical background of this conflict and also the way we would like to treat our brothers in Ukraine. Because Russia has never ever announced, no way, you will not find this information in any kind of media, that a Russian president or Russian officials or any kind of Russian representatives have been expressing a hostility towards Ukrainians or Ukrainian people. So we are two brothers, so we are in brotherhood nations. And of course, this is a big drama for Ukrainian people and for Russians as well, which both sides are willing to end that kind of conflict. But to end conflict doesn't mean that it should be freezed. It should be reached a certain result. The question mark is that what kind of result is expected from the Russian side and from the side of the West. The origin of those expectations seem quite different, because Russians' goals have been clearly articulated. We want to eliminate the threat of nationalism, extremism, that has reached the borders of Russian Federation. Due to the collapse and failure of diplomatic efforts that started many years ago, Minsk number 1, Minsk number 2 agreements, etc. And multiple efforts from the Russian side, from the Russian diplomacy, to stop the escalation of the diplomatic, let's say, failures and tensions between two nations. And I think it's logical that Russia is willing in this very day, of course, to end that conflict, but to end with a certain concrete results that will eliminate the reasons of that conflict.
I think it's important that you mention that it ends in certain kinds of results. The way that it started was that Russia had some genuine concerns about the enlargement of NATO. And this is not the first time that Russia has mentioned that. Those fears have been mentioned repeatedly over the years. And I think it is also widely accepted that this conflict is not between Russia and Ukraine. It is a conflict between Russia and NATO and the United States. So we all know that, and that is one of the reasons why it has dragged on for so long, and it continues to. Peace is still not on the horizon, despite the fact that Donald Trump and President Putin also had a meeting. The larger question, which in a way affects us also here, and I'm going to obviously circle back to Pakistan, is that the issue of the final outcome of this war. Here in Pakistan, there's a general belief that ultimately Russia will prevail. And the fact that there's no treaty right now is because it does not suit Russia. How long do you think this could continue? Could Russia go on indefinitely till it is able to get the outcome that it desires? Or do you think the NATO and the US are going to pump in more money, more weapons, more technology, more everything that is needed to make sure that Russia does not get the outcome that it desires?
I think that the longitude or amplitude of this conflict is heavily depending on the position of the West. Because Russian position, diplomatic position, official position is quite open, so we're ready to stop that conflict at every single moment when our counterparties will be ready to hear to our concerns and to seriously be ready to talk and to discuss the reasons of those conflicts on a serious level. But as soon as we have stopped being heard for years, and no matter what Russia has been sending as a signal towards Washington and Brussels, we have been refused to the basic civilized dialogue. And that was evident, so you can monitor, you can track it back. This is number one thing. Number two, you can hear what kind of logistics, what kind of rhetoric is actually spread all around the European Union these days. So Brussels is eager to go nach Osten. So it's not even about expansion of NATO, it's aggression of NATO against Russia. So as for the Washington, DC, I think that with one hand, during the daytime, so they're proclaiming peace talk, during the nighttime, so they're completely confused and telling that actually they are in full support of their European allies and they're ready to send them more weaponry and actually support military operation against of Russia. So we have been facing on a constant basis that kind of dualism, dilemmas, and double standards against of Russia. And the third thing that I have to make you to pay attention is that Russia is the only country in the world that succeeded to raise up and to stand against of that hostility and that, let's say, verbal aggression and disrespect towards the sovereignty of the national state. And you should actually watch it out from the position of Pakistan and other countries and your partners and to reflect what can happen if Russia fails. I think it's in everyone's interest that Russia wins in a historical, contextual, political way. Because the victory of Russia, the victory of truth, will mean that the new world order will be more fair and more balanced. It will mean that actually other parties and partners of Russia will be witnessing more opportunities to talk about multipolar world.
So while of course Russia has this war to fight in Europe, even in this region in Central South Asia, there are other challenges, and Russia of course has always historically been involved in this region, and especially in the last a couple of decades. Now, I want to focus a bit on Afghanistan, and then we'll talk a bit about India also. You've been following what's happening between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and the talks that have been held and led to no results. Frankly speaking, Pakistan, we're not surprised, because I don't think anybody was expecting the Taliban regime to actually rein in the TTP. And from our side, it's very clear that allowing the TTP to use Afghan soil to wage terror attacks on Pakistan is unacceptable. It's non-negotiable. Turkey has tried to mediate. Qatar has tried to mediate. Iran has tried to mediate. nothing has come out. What is looking very realistic from our perspective now is that Pakistan will have to do everything that it can to make sure that TTP does not have the ability to wage terrorism against Pakistan. That would mean Pakistan taking a lot of military action wherever required, not against the Afghan state, but against TTP. This logic, this reasoning is very well understood in Pakistan and among Pakistan friends. How do you think Russia is going to look at it if Pakistan, after having tried everything, is now left with no option but to take the military route to solve this problem of terrorism from Afghanistan?
I think that the Russian side fully understands the concerns of Pakistan in relation to Afghanistan. Sometimes I hear from the side of some experts in Pakistan and other countries that their expectations from the Russian side and the lack of so-called active position or proactive position is lacking, is missing. And I'm trying to understand to my colleagues that if Russia, if Moscow, Kremlin is silent, it's a very sophisticated silence. Russia is not willing to interfere into the hot conflicts. You could see the behavior of Russia in Syria. You could see the behavior of Russia very resilient, very balanced when it was a conflict between India and Pakistan. So Russia has been advocating a diplomatic effort as a primary instrument of resolving the conflict. That's why I think Russia is fully aware of the concerns of Pakistan and is willing to stretch its hand in a diplomatic efforts in order to regulate and find better resolution of this conflict.
But the issue, that crops up is that a lot of people believe, and rightly so, that those countries which have influence in Afghanistan, regional countries, which includes Russia, China, the US to some extent, Saudi Arabia, perhaps some Gulf countries, these players can actually make a difference when it comes to influencing the Taliban regime. And from our perspective, obviously, nobody wants to use kinetic action. Diplomacy is the best solution. We've tried diplomacy bilaterally with Afghanistan, has worked. Do you think China and Russia, with the kind of influence and leverage that they have in Afghanistan, they need to be more proactive to rein in the Taliban regime? Or do you think they've done whatever they could and now Pakistan should take matters into its own hands?
I think that everything is taking place in the right order. I see the situation from the position that Russia and China has given the dancing floor, let's say negotiation floor, to Turkey and Qatar in order to give them opportunity to express their diplomatic will and their diplomatic capacity. From now on, when we can see that diplomatic efforts have failed, so the peace talk didn't reach the expected results, so I think that's the time to think about the phase number 2. I think that's the right moment when Russia and China can actually come up and formulate more sophisticated, more systemic approach from completely another position. I think from the position which is not in favor of the Western partners, because Afghanistan, unfortunately, is located now, embraced by the hands of the quite destructive forces.
But what is phase 2? When you say a time is here for phase 2 is China and Russia speaking to the Taliban. Is that what you're...
I think you know that Russian side actually puts the stigma away from Taliban because as a terroristic organization, now they are not marked as a terrorist in Russia. It means Russia has opened the door for negotiation. Russia also, in a very sophisticated, as I highlighted before, way, understands the concerns not only of Afghanistan, but Russia understands the interplay of the forces on the territory of Afghanistan. Because you are looking at Afghanistan through the lenses of Taliban, but you should understand that Taliban are not lonely figures and actors on this stage. There are other forces which are heavily interested in creating a hot, boiling zone that will be irritating Pakistan heavily.
ISKP.
Yes.
But again, my point is that phase two, as you described, phase one has failed. We all know that. For us, phase two could be Pakistan now doing whatever it needs to do to take care of the terrorism problem. But phase two could also mean, as you said, China and Russia being a bit more proactive than they are. Is that possible? Do you think China and Russia can actually intervene in a manner that could influence the Taliban? Or do you think that's not going to happen? And both the countries would tell Pakistan, we've tried everything. Now you go and do whatever you need to do.
I think it depends on the manner Pakistan will manage that phase number two. If Pakistan will expect that Russia and China individually or collectively express themselves the initiative to interfere into this conflict, I think that is actually a wrong expectation. I believe that Pakistan should formulate a special initiative, a special approach that will attract Russia and China and invite Russia and China to these kind of diplomatic efforts. I think Pakistan should take an initiative in this case. That's why, as the Russian president used to say, we can't be more patriots of Pakistan than Pakistans themselves.
So which means that Pakistan formally asking Moscow and Beijing to intervene, to speak to the Taliban, to do whatever needs to be done diplomatically before phase three starts. But here's the problem with that. The terrorism from their side is not stopping. You've been here a couple of days. You've already seen what happened in Islamabad, the college in Wana, where students, thank God, there was the security forces were able to save all those students. So while we are talking about talks, terrorism is not stopping. It's happening every day. So from Pakistan's perspective, we actually don't have the luxury of time. We can't just wait for Russia or China to make up their mind and say, okay, we will intervene. All the time, all the while, Pakistan has to face this terrorism on a daily basis. So in that sense, my point is that what you're calling phase two, perhaps the time for that is already over.
It depends how you take it. You have indicated quite a serious problem, a common problem. So how to combat terrorism? It's a great concern, not only of Pakistan and Russia as well, but if you could mention, Russia has a great experience of counter-terroristic operations. So we had Chechnya, we had Caucasus, so we have great experience. And Russian army and intelligence service is one of the most brilliant and experienced in the world. Of course, now we've got experience in Ukrainian battlefield, etc. So we are practically, both of us, we are aware of all these kind of threats and risks. I think that in order to answer to your question in a practical mode, let's say in a more precise, pragmatic, I would actually recommend, or I would formulate a kind of hybrid form of action. Now, of course, we can't eliminate an urgent need to react in a military way, because it's not possible otherwise to rely only on diplomatic talks while people are dead or these suicide bombers are continuously, acting in such an aggressive way on the territory of Pakistan. So it's absolutely unacceptable. I think there is a third element which has been misused or undermined by Pakistani officials. It's an instrument of information warfare. I think Pakistan should much more proactively organize special information operations that will be working from the side of this synthesis between diplomatic efforts, military efforts, and of course, mild, soft propaganda and soft power efforts. As I mentioned yesterday, I coined that the ground of Magala dialogue, an idea, an initiative that will be quite useful for Pakistan is to create a system of information monitoring system. So it will be kind of system that picks up the operational data and reacts on this kind of situation more proactively than even military forces can do. So it's a kind of, it requires a rapidly decisive, actions, how to react on those kind of situations.